Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. Today we're going to do chapter 4 in Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, and we've been using this is a little pocketbook, a version of it that came out a few years ago, and this over here is the graphic edition, which is absolutely stunning in the pictures and the representations that are in there. It's worthwhile getting a copy of this. It's really inspiring. And historically, it's got so many facts in there about things that happened in the 20th century that a lot of us aren't really well aware of. So that's why we're going through this. It's a really important exercise, I think, right now. I'm supposedly attempting to inspire people to get active. Tom Hartman finishes his show I mentioned before. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Tag, you're it. It's time to get active, get active. Well, in 2002, after the war in Afghanistan had started, a little bit after the war had started, about a year after 9/11, I get an email in the middle of the night from a relative back east who's very conservative and very Christian, and it's a picture of George Bush with an American flag wrapped around him and a cross in back of him and an AK-47 in his hand. I don't have the image anymore. I should have kept it. I keep so much, but I didn't keep that. But it really stuck in my mind. It really upset me, and I wound up sitting down that night writing a 3-page ranting poem called Democracy, Christianity, and Insanity. And it was about a lot of hypocrisy in the church and the connections between the war and Christ, and these weird images that were being put out there by the pro-war people who were sort of almost everywhere. But the big image was Bush with the American flag literally wrapped around him, AK-47 and a cross in back of him. Well, since that time, you couldn't get into Washington without having an American flag lapel pin on you. So the right wing has embraced the flag culture, so to speak, to the point where Trump would be on the stage there and he would literally be hugging flags while the right-wing Christian groups are completely supporting him along with the NRA. So you've had this merger of violence and Christianity along with nationalism in terms of the flag, the cross, and the guns going on for the last 20-odd years. And I'm not sure exactly how we get away from it or what we do about it, but let's just become more aware of it. The two things that was the one thing that struck me was, as I read this chapter and I was trying to think of some current segues to make or connections to make. And the second one was the play, It Can't Happen Here. Let me put it over here for a second. There's the playbill from the play It Can't Happen Here. And we saw this back, let me see if I can get it up here. Nope, whoops, nope, forget that. Let's get it down, and we'll move back over here. All right. We saw the play in 2016. I don't usually go to Berkeley Rep, but I do go to a lot of plays. And so anyway, we went to it. It was a very political play. It's what really drew me into it. And Sinclair Lewis, it was sort of funny because when I first saw the name Sinclair Lewis, I got it mixed up with Upton Sinclair. And Upton Sinclair is the one who, I've had this little quote by Upton Sinclair sitting on my desk for ages. When fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in a flag and carrying a cross. When fascism comes to America, it'll be wrapped in a flag and carrying a cross. Well, nothing could be more prescient than that statement by Upton Sinclair. Upton Sinclair was a novelist and social crusader back in the early part of the 20th century. He wrote famously The Jungle, was the famous book he wrote, where he exposed the unsanitary conditions within the meatpacking industry. Later on in the century, I think it was 1934, he was a Democratic candidate for governor in California. He has nearly 100 books out. He's a real social activist from the 20th century. So that quote of his has embedded into my mind over the years. Well, the play is by Sinclair Lewis. Sinclair Lewis is a different Sinclair, and he's also a writer and playwright, and he was the first American to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. Nobel Prize in Literature. And he's the one who's responsible, Sinclair Lewis is responsible for Elmer Gantry and Babbitt and Main Street. And there's a lot of images that we all have that are a result of Sinclair Lewis's writing. He saw the rise of these dictators in Europe in the 30s, and he wrote this novel, It Can't Happen Here. And in the novel, there's a guy running for office here, Windrip, and he's the populist fascist, and he's starting to stir up a lot of support. And there's a quiet sort of mouse-like editor in Vermont. This is all in the play, and his name is Dormus. And he would rather just surround himself with books and intelligentsia and be a nice little intellectual, sort of a Wilson type. But circumstances force him to get active. So literally, because of the conditions that this Dormus is running around, and Dormus is the Democrat, the Democrats were very pro-Nazi back in the 30s, as a historical fact. So the Democrat is very anti-Jewish in the original text, and Dormus is his name is Dormus, which is a riff on the name of the dormouse from Alice in Wonderland, who's always falling asleep. So the idea is that the intellectuals and the people who need to be activists are sort of falling asleep at the wheel, and they're not really getting engaged. And it's not till things get really bad, and he realized that nobody else is going to take care of things, that the system of checks and balance we have isn't working, that Dormus starts to get active. He's forced into it. He's forced into it. In the play, they rewrote the play considerably. Sinclair Lewis was a novelist. He wasn't a playwright. And the play that he collaborated to write was a lousy version of his book. So the play itself never went very far because of that. When the Berkeley reps sat down and they read the play, they realized, oh, this is garbage. They rewrote quite a bit of the play with the permission from the Sinclair Lewis estate. And they put into it a lot of references to what's currently going on, to what was currently going on. This is 2016, before Trump wins the election. Before he wins the election is when the play came out. And when I left the play, I said to myself, my God, this can't happen here. 8 years later, or six years later, it is happening here. The line they use here is, Winthrop is just something that was vomited up. He's not the real issue. The real issue is what vomited it up. What vomited it up, not the person. So just like Bush went out, just like Trump went out and put a dozen people in a boiler room and had them listening to right-wing radio and copying down the questions that were coming in. That's how he put his whole platform together. So he didn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars like everybody else did. He had about a half a dozen people in a boiler room writing down right-wing radio comments that were coming into these stations, and that's how he put together his whole platform. There's this level of white supremacy, xenophobic racism that's anti-progressive that runs throughout a large part of the fundamentalist sections of the country. And when he says, so the statement that the real issue is what he vomited up. So Trump just sort of plugged into what was already there, and he's become a spokesperson for it, and his whole apprenticeship television show is what allowed him to do this. He's literally the Elmer Gantry, to go back to Sinclair Lewis again. He's literally the Elmer Gantry of the 21st century, this guy. And so So Dormus is forced into it, and he becomes an activist, and he's running for president against him. And that's basically what the play is about. It's about what happens in this period of time, and there's a plethora of flags brought on the stage continuously. These symbolic flags are brought out all the time. At the end of the day, the progressives are starting to flee to Canada, which was an interesting thing that I remembered from the play vividly. And all during the Trump era, every year you kept hearing people saying, I'm going to go to Canada if this gets any worse. Well, nowadays the Canadian border is sort of screwed up, and I think they just started to arrest some of these protesters. But the Canadian border Canada didn't look so inviting last week as it has over the years. So that was sort of an interesting flip, also. Let me go into the actual. Let's take down the Fascism Comes, and the chapter. Well, we saw the chapter and we showed you the picture of the face of it. The take responsibility for the face of the world. Whoops, little picture I cut out from the book, and that's the sawing off the swastikas the tree has turned into. The first chapter. Over here we have a picture of a gentleman farmer pig. So there's 3 stories in this chapter here, and one has got to do with the Soviets under Stalin and the Nazis in Germany, and then Czechoslovakia later on. So we'll start off with this little story, and the image of the pig was an image that was put out by the Stalin government in order to get the farmers to focus on the pig-like aspects of the better farmers that were there. Stalin wanted to get a hold of all the farmland in Russia. He wanted to convert any monies that they might have into manufacturing and move the country out of a peasant economy into a manufacturing. Well, the way he was going to do it was by taking all of their land. So what they did was they made the gentleman farmers, maybe 25 or 20% of the farmers were doing really well, and they were like the gentleman farmers. And the rest of them weren't doing so well. So he created them as the enemy from these poor people. So the poor people then started going after these gentleman farmers and taking the land back from them. Well, at the end of the day, after that kind of conflict, which we can see going on in this country right and left, one group getting pitted against another group, the abortionists, the anti-abortionists, the critical race theories against the anti-critical race theories. At the end of the day, the communists came in and they seized everybody's land. So first they created the enemy between the two, they took part of their land, and then at the end of the day, the government came in and took everybody's land. And what happened for the next 3 years, there was severe starvation throughout Russia. They collectivized all of the farms, and they sucked out all of the value from the farms. And literally for the next years, there was massive starvation going on throughout Russia. Massive starvation. Literally to the point where the peasants were literally butchering corpses for human meat. 1933 in Germany. Butchering corpses for human meat. So that's 1933, the same year that Hitler starts to come to power in Germany. When he comes to power, and they're sort of flush with a lot of chutzpah about that, and they think that, well, let's organize a boycott of Jewish shops. Well, they tried to do this organization in Jewish shops, blah, blah, blah. It didn't work so well. Then they started to go out and they started to put the Jewish symbols on the Jewish stores and writing Jewish on them, writing Aryan on the rest of them. Well, over time, the Jewish stores started to be boycotted. People weren't going to them anymore, and people at a certain point started to think, well, I wish this whole thing would just get over with and disappear. Which, by the end of 6 years from when they started doing this whole program, they started to physically disappear the Jews from Germany and send them to concentration camps. The third example he gives is Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia in 1946. The communists win in 46 in Czechoslovakia, and 2 years later in 48, they have a coup and they literally take over the entire government, all branches of government. They Workers of the World United is a little saying you've heard of before in the past, and what they did was they required the people to put that in their window, and they called it the green grocer signage, the green grocer slogan. And most people weren't the least bit aware of they'd never read the Communist Manifesto, they didn't know what Workers of the World Unite meant. All they knew is that it was the governmentally approved symbol, and if you didn't put it in your window, you were going to be in trouble. Just like, you can't go into Washington without wearing Washington, D.C. without wearing a lapel pin nowadays. It was that kind of thing was going on. And it wasn't the slogan itself that was as important as the code behind the slogan. Now, if you listen to Fox News at all, and apparently, according to Bill Maher last night, I think 40% of the progressives or Democrats listen to Fox News at night. No wonder we're in such bad shape. In either case, the code words on there are just rampant all night long. You hear these underlying inferences to the xenophobic, racist, white supremacist, pro-Christian, anti-progressive agenda that they are pro-Russian agenda that they are all pushing. So it's not necessarily the symbol, it's the meanings, the underlying meanings underneath the whole symbol. And let me come over here and I'll show you a couple of pictures I put together. Let's get this down from here. Oops, get rid of the red and get rid of the black. And these were a few of the symbols I grabbed off the internet the other night. And we see the Stop the Steal over here, and the Stop the Steal, and over there, Make America Great Again, the famous Trump hat with the Make America Great Again. It's over an American flag. Right in the middle here, we have a picture of Donald, literally superimposed on an American flag. This isn't from January 6th, I believe this is from Michigan. So Donald is, yeah. He's over the flag, and over here we have the cross being lifted up. I think this is Michigan again. And down below here, we have, this wasn't Michigan, this was, I believe, in Washington. We have this character dressed up like George Washington. He's dressed like George Washington with his puffed white hair and his little riding cape on, and he's kneeling down next to a Trump flag, kneeling down, religiously praying next to a Trump flag. Over here, this is in on January 6th. We see a mixture over here of American flags, Confederate flags, Trump flag. There must be about a half a dozen different Trump flags, at least, out there. Various kinds of flags with his name emblazoned on them. Make America Great Again, Stop the Steal, Trump's picture, all this kind of stuff. So he's created. And there's a actual little close-up there. Oh yeah, and there's the, I forgot to mention, the hangman's noose there to hang the vice president, who just the other day didn't quite come out in total support of the January 6th insurrection, but he pointed out that he separated the violent people from the non-violent people. The Republican National Committee they're after Cheney, they're severely after Pence. Unbelievable that he actually went against Trump, but he's sort of giving himself a little breathing room there by saying that there were a lot of non-violent people at the January 6th event. So the import of this whole thing were the symbols. So watch the symbols that are out there and realize sometimes that there's more meaning to them than just the visual that you get. There's a lot of undercurrents to everything that's being pushed in front of our faces, right and left. That's it. Chapter 4, Peace, Patience, Persistence, and hopefully we'll see you for Chapter 5 next week. Thanks for joining.